The world turned upside down, a chaotic kaleidoscope of sky and sea. He felt a brief, searing moment of terror, a primal scream trapped within his throat, before the icy shock of the water enveloped him. It was a cold that bit deep, stealing his breath and his warmth in an instant. But more chilling than the frigid embrace of the Mediterranean was the sudden, profound blankness that washed over his mind, a tide even more devastating than the one that pulled him down. His memories, already fragile, already like wisps of smoke in a hurricane, receded with an almost audible sigh. The carefully constructed calm, the gentle rhythms of his amnesiac existence, were not just disrupted, they were obliterated. He was adrift, not just in the vast ocean, but within the desolate, uncharted territory of his own mind. The last vestiges of connection, the faint echoes of a life he couldn't recall, were swept away, leaving behind a void so absolute, so terrifying, that it threatened to consume him. He was utterly lost, disconnected from himself, a phantom cast adrift from his own reality. He flailed, a desperate, instinctual struggle against the crushing weight of the water. His senses were a muddled symphony of cold, pressure, and a disorienting, all-encompassing darkness. He couldn't remember how he had fallen, couldn't remember the yacht, couldn't remember Tifa. The names, the faces, the entire edifice of his existence had crumbled into dust. His mind was a blank slate, scoured clean by the brutal impact. He was a newborn, thrust into a world he didn't recognize, with no guiding instincts, no innate knowledge, only the raw, desperate need to survive. The water rushed into his mouth, burning his throat, and for a terrifying moment, he thought that was it, the end of a life he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Then, a primal surge of will, a deeply buried instinct to live, propelled him upwards. His limbs moved with a desperate, uncoordinated energy, a frantic scrabbling towards the light. He broke the surface with a gasp, choking on salt water, his eyes stinging and watering. The immediate, overwhelming sensation was the blinding glare of the sun on the water, a light so intense it felt like a physical blow. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, to make sense of the vast, shimmering expanse that surrounded him. The yacht, a stark white silhouette against the impossibly blue sky, was now some distance away, a mocking testament to the normalcy he had so recently inhabited, a normalcy he could no longer grasp. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his throat. He was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. The familiar scent of salt and sea was now tinged with the metallic tang of his own fear. He tried to call out, to shout for Tifa, but only a hoarse, ragged croak escaped his lips. His voice, a stranger to him, sounded weak and reedy against the immensity of the ocean. He looked around frantically, his gaze sweeping the horizon, searching for any sign of her. Any sign of rescue. But there was nothing. Only the endless blue, the indifferent expanse of the sea stretching in every direction, mirroring the emptiness that had taken root within him. The cold of the water began to seep into his bones, a deep, penetrating chill that no amount of sunlight could dispel. He shivered uncontrollably, his teeth chattering, a stark contrast to the languid warmth he had felt just moments before. His muscles ached with the exertion of his struggle, and a dull throbbing began to set in behind his eyes. He was a castaway, a forgotten soul cast out into the indifferent maw of the ocean. He tried to recall his name, to anchor himself to some semblance of identity, but it was no use. The void remained. It was as if his mind had been wiped clean, all past experiences, all learned knowledge, all personal history erased in a single, brutal instant. He didn't know who he was, where he came from, or what he was doing in the middle of the sea. The fragments of his former life, the fleeting impressions that had haunted him, the phantom weight of a weapon, the instinct to protect, were gone. They had been illusions, he now realized, mere echoes of a past that was irrevocably lost. He treaded water, his movements becoming more economical, a desperate attempt to conserve energy. He knew, with a chilling certainty that bypassed any conscious thought, that he couldn't stay here forever. The sun, which had seemed so benevolent moments ago, now felt like a predator, its relentless heat slowly but surely draining his strength. He had to get back to the yacht. But how? He had no idea how to swim proficiently, no understanding of currents or navigation. His instincts, usually so reliable, had abandoned him. He scanned the yacht again, its white hull a beacon of hope, yet so tantalizingly out of reach. He could make out Tifa now, a small figure on the deck, silhouetted against the sky. She was looking in his direction, her posture one of alarm. A surge of recognition, a faint spark of something that felt like connection, flickered within him. Tifa. The name, so simple, so resonant, returned to him, and with it, a vague sense of shared experience. She was important. She was the only link to the person he might have been. He tried to call her name again, a desperate plea now, a primal cry for salvation. Tifa, he rasped, his voice raw and strained. He waved an arm, a weak, flagging gesture that he desperately hoped she would see. His strength was failing. The cold was relentless, and the sheer effort of staying afloat was beginning to overwhelm him. He felt a heavy weariness descend, a seductive pull towards the oblivion of the water below. The yacht seemed to drift further away with each passing second, a cruel trick of the light, or perhaps a shift in the currents. He couldn't be sure. His perception was warped, his senses dulled by the cold and the shock. He imagined her shouting his name, her voice carried on the wind, but he couldn't be certain. Was it real, or just another phantom of his fractured mind? He noticed then, with a jolt that sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through him, that the yacht was moving. It was slowly, inexorably, drifting away from him. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over him. He was being abandoned. Cast adrift. His last tenuous link to his past, his only known companion, was sailing away, leaving him to the mercy of the sea. He thrashed, a desperate, frenzied attempt to swim towards the receding vessel. But his efforts were futile. The distance between them widened with agonizing slowness. He felt the water pulling at him, not just the ebb and flow of the waves, but a deeper, more insidious force, as if the ocean itself were trying to reclaim him, to pull him down into its cold, silent depths. His arms and legs felt heavy, unresponsive, like lead weights dragging him down. He looked at Tifa again, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. He saw her point, her silhouette a desperate silhouette against the vastness. Was she trying to help? Was she in distress? Or was she leaving? The ambiguity was a torment, a fresh layer of confusion added to the already unbearable burden of his amnesia. He couldn't discern her intentions, couldn't understand the dynamics of their relationship. All he knew was that he was alone, adrift, and the only person who might hold the key to his past was sailing away. The yacht seemed to drift further away with each passing second, a cruel trick of the light, or perhaps a shift in the currents. He couldn't be sure. His perception was warped, his senses dulled by the cold and the shock. He imagined her shouting his name, her voice carried on the wind, but he couldn't be certain. Was it real, or just another phantom of his fractured mind? He noticed then, with a jolt that sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through him, that the yacht was moving. It was slowly, inexorably, drifting away from him. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over him. He was being abandoned. Cast adrift. His last tenuous link to his past, his only known companion, was sailing away, leaving him to the mercy of the sea. He thrashed, a desperate, frenzied attempt to swim towards the receding vessel. But his efforts were futile. The distance between them widened with agonizing slowness. He felt the water pulling at him, not just the ebb and flow of the waves, but a deeper, more insidious force, as if the ocean itself were trying to reclaim him, to pull him down into its cold, silent depths. His arms and legs felt heavy, unresponsive, like lead weights dragging him down. He looked at Tifa again, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. He saw her point, her silhouette a desperate silhouette against the vastness. Was she trying to help? Was she in distress? Or was she leaving? The ambiguity was a torment, a fresh layer of confusion added to the already unbearable burden of his amnesia. He couldn't discern her intentions, couldn't understand the dynamics of their relationship. All he knew was that he was alone, adrift, and the only person who might hold the key to his past was sailing away. The life they had been living, tethered to the vestiges of clouds past, had begun to fray at the edges, much like the delicate stitching on her favorite apron. For months, perhaps even years, time had become a fluid, unreliable concept. She had been the anchor for a man adrift. She had navigated the currents of his fragmented memories, the phantom pains of battles fought and lost, the lingering echoes of a duty he no longer fully understood. She had been his confidant, his caregiver, the quiet steady presence in the storm of his amnesia. But the strain had begun to take its toll. The weight of his unspoken burdens, the constant vigilance required to keep him safe, to keep him from falling prey to the shadows that haunted his past, had settled upon her shoulders like a shroud. She saw the desperate flailing in the water, the raw fear in his eyes as he broke the surface, gasping for air. A part of her screamed to rush to his aid, to throw a life-preserver, to offer the comfort and reassurance she always had. But another part, a deeper, more insistent voice that had been growing louder with each passing, unfulfilled day, whispered a different command. This was not just a fall, it was a severing. The violent disruption of the sea was, in a strange and terrible way, an answer to prayers she hadn't dared to voice. The burden of his soldier past, the very essence of the man he was, had become a shadow that eclipsed any semblance of a normal life for her. It wasn't that she didn't care, or that she had ever stopped loving the man she knew existed beneath the fractured memories. It was simply that the constant effort of maintaining that fragile illusion, of piecing together a life from scattered fragments, had worn her down to the bone. Every hushed conversation about operations, every tense moment when he seemed lost in a memory she couldn't access, every fear that his past would inevitably catch up with them, it all chipped away at her own spirit, her own burgeoning desire for a simpler, lighter existence. She recalled their quiet mornings by the sea, the gentle lapping of waves against the hull of the yacht. It had been an escape, a temporary reprieve from the anxieties that had plagued them since their arrival in this coastal town. She had hoped that the salty air and the endless horizon would bring him peace, would help him heal. But the peace was only ever a fragile veneer, easily shattered. And in this moment, as he fought for his life in the churning water, she felt a strange, dispassionate clarity descend upon her. The life they had built, or rather, the life she had meticulously maintained around the ghost of his past, was unsustainable. It was a life lived in the shadow of his potential, his former self. She yearned for a life that was hers, unburdened by the constant specter of his soldier duties, the ever-present threat of his past resurfacing with explosive force. She saw his disorientation, the raw, untamed fear in his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to protect him from it. Instead, she felt a nascent sense of freedom. The impulse to scream, to call out to him, warred with a chilling pragmatism. If he was truly lost, truly disconnected from his past, then perhaps this was the only way for him to truly find himself, or at least, a version of himself that didn't come with the baggage of his former life. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the only way for her to find herself, too. The weight of his memories, the responsibility she had so willingly, and then so tirelessly, shouldered, was a tangible thing. In that moment, watching him struggle, she felt it begin to lift. She remembered the endless nights she had spent poring over old documents, trying to decipher the fragmented clues to his identity, trying to reconstruct the man he once was. She had done it out of love, out of a desperate hope for normalcy, but the process had been exhausting, a constant excavation of a past that wasn't entirely hers. Now, as Cloud fought against the indifferent sea, she saw an opportunity to stop digging. To let the earth reclaim what it had buried. To let the past finally, truly, fade away. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, the nails digging into her palms. The usual kindness in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, almost fierce determination. It was a hard look, one that few had ever seen on Tifa Lockhart, but it was a look born not of cruelty, but of a profound, almost desperate need for self-preservation. She had spent too long living in someone else's shadow, tending to the embers of a fire that had already burned out. The sea was a vast, unforgiving expanse, and Cloud was a tiny, struggling figure within it. She watched him, her gaze unwavering, as he desperately tried to swim towards the yacht, his movements becoming more labored, his energy visibly draining. A pang of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, tried to surface, but she pushed it down, reminding herself of the suffocating weight of their previous existence. This was not abandonment, it was liberation. For him and for her. If he could survive this, if he could find his way back to shore without her, then perhaps he was stronger than she had ever given him credit for. And if he couldn't, well, the thought was too painful to dwell on, but even then, perhaps it was a mercy. A clean break, a swift end to the endless cycle of hope and despair. She knew the risks. The world was a dangerous place, and Cloud, even with his lost memories, possessed a certain aura, a latent power that could draw unwanted attention. Without her to guide him, to temper his instincts, he could be vulnerable. But the alternative, continuing to live as she had been, a constant caretaker, a perpetual guardian of a past that was slowly eroding her own identity, that felt like a slow, agonizing death. The yacht continued its slow drift, pulling away from him. She could see his frustration, his increasing desperation. He was calling out to her, his voice a faint rasp carried on the wind. She didn't respond. She couldn't. To respond would be to undo the decision she had just made, to pull herself back into the fray, back into the exhausting dance of his past. Her gaze traced the line of his struggling form against the endless blue. She saw him falter, his movements becoming less coordinated, his strength waning. It was a terrible sight, a testament to his vulnerability, and yet, in a way she couldn't quite articulate, it was also a testament to his resilience. He was fighting, even without the anchor of his memories. He was, in his own way, a survivor. She turned away from the railing then, her resolve hardening with each step she took towards the cabin. The sun beat down on her back, a warm, almost indifferent caress. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, but it was a different kind of loneliness than she had experienced before. It wasn't the loneliness of being a caretaker, of being the only one holding things together. It was the lonely clarity of someone who had made a choice, a difficult, life-altering choice, and was now solely responsible for its consequences. She thought of the quiet life she had envisioned, a life free from the shadows of war and memory. A life where she could simply be Tifa, not Tifa the caretaker, not Tifa the confidant, but just Tifa, a woman with her own dreams, her own desires. This moment, this violent disruption, was the catalyst. It was the breaking point that forced her hand. The illusion of peace, shattered by the unforgiving sea, had also, in a twisted way, shattered the illusion of their shared future as she had been living it. She stepped into the cool, dim interior of the cabin, the scent of salt and wood filling her nostrils. The rhythmic creak of the yacht was a stark contrast to the chaotic sounds of Cloud's struggle in the water. She closed the door behind her, shutting out the sight of him, shutting out the last vestiges of their shared life. It was a calculated decision, a painful severance, but in its brutal finality, there was also a strange sense of peace. She was free, even if the cost of that freedom was a profound and terrible uncertainty. The sea would now write the next chapter, for both of them, and she could only hope that it would be a chapter of release, not despair. She knew the path ahead would be arduous, marked by the ghost of what might have been, but for the first time in a long time, the path felt entirely her own. The quiet life by the sea was over, not in the peaceful way she had hoped, but in a way that promised a new, albeit daunting, beginning. The calculated decision was made, and the consequences, whatever they might be, would have to be faced alone.